Welcome back. It is another time for Revelation Bible Study. We're going to be starting at chapter 10 today and going on from there. So I hope everyone has a blessed time by listening to this. We had more video issues. I'm so sorry. I'll work on that hopefully with week after next. But anyway, so no video today, but all the audio is still here. I hope you are still blessed to be a blessing. And I hope that you can be able to read this for transformation. Bless y'all. Love you. Bye-bye. All right, so we're going to be we're starting chapter 10 here. For those of you who might be new or whatever else, we've recorded all the ones before this. So if you ever want to play catch up, you can do that. Watch it on our YouTube channel, the church's YouTube channel, and we can be able to do that. But just letting you know if you feel really lost or wondering what do you mean you talked about that last 2 Sundays ago, you can know what we're talking about. All right, so we're going to read chapter 10 here. Whoever would like to read, we're going to read. Let's read 10, 1 through 7. Whoever would like to read.
And I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud, with a rainbow over his head. His face was like the sun, and his legs like pillars of fire. He held a little scroll open in his hand, setting his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. He gave a great shout like a lion roaring. And when he shouted, the 7 thunders sounded. And when the 7 thunders had sounded, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Seal up what the 7 thunders have said, and do not write it down." Then the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and the land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, and the sea and what is in it. There will be no more delay. But in the days when the 7th angel is to blow his trumpet, the mystery of God will be fulfilled, as he announced to his servants, the prophets.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So, all right, so we have another scroll here, and then we have this being that's coming down. Now, the being that's coming down, the imagery of feet as pillars of fire and a face as the sun, those have all been kind of images for Jesus after Jesus had passed away. And then wrapped in clouds and a rainbow should automatically make you think of the Creator Covenant God, like what some people would say the Father God. So what's really going on there is John in this vision is actually combining Jesus and God in one image by doing that. So this image is of Jesus, but also of God in one single entity. And then we have in verse 2 that the sea and the land. Now, notice that the sea, now I don't know if y'all remember or not, but the imagery of the sea to the Jewish people is one of, and probably not even just Jewish, for Gentiles alike at the time period, was one of chaos. The sea was the place of chaos. So one of my favorite things is when Jesus cast out all the demons out of Legion, he sent them to the pigs, and then where the pigs go, they went into the sea, and they went back home. That's the place of chaos. And that's also right before Jesus did that with the pigs. Jesus calmed the storm. He was on the boat and he calmed the storm. And he's walking on the water to go get, who was it that was in the water? Peter? Was it Peter that was in the water? I think it was Peter. But he went to go pick him up out of the water because the water was the chaos. And here he's walking on it. Like, this is a guy who has power over even chaos, is what those things are saying. So here, same thing. We have this individual that represents God and Jesus, and he has one foot on the sea. He has another foot on the land. So it's obviously what's going on there is showing the imagery of here's the ruler of the land and the sea. The land could represent fallen Babylon world, and the sea could represent the chaotic home of demons or whatever else. And so that's also where the beasts come from and stuff like that. So that's the imagery of what's going on here. So we're seeing God / Jesus showing how amazingly powerful God is. And then we have in verse 3, shouted like a voice like a lion roaring. And anytime you hear the imagery of a lion, you need to automatically think in the Jewish mindset the tribe of Judah. The tribe of Judah was always represented with a lion. And so, again, Jesus comes from the line of Judah. And so, again, this is just another hint that, hey, this is Jesus. This is the Messiah here. All right. And then in verse 4, I love this. When the seven thunders spoke, I was about to write, but then I heard a voice from heaven. Seal up what the seven thunders said. Don't write it down. So I think that all that's saying there is there was so much more to the vision that we didn't ever even get. John didn't even write down some of the vision of what's going on there. But, of course, no one has any idea what was said there because John was told not to write it down. So he didn't write it down. Then we have in verse 4 and 5 this angel who had been standing on the sea and the land. This God raised their right hand. Again, the right hand is the one who does all the action towards heaven and swore an oath by the one who lives forever and ever, who made heaven. Here's Janet Kane coming in. Who made heaven and what it contains, the earth and what it contains, and the sea and what it contains. Again, this is combining, God with Jesus here. But that God's mystery would be completed in the days of the voice of the seventh angel who is going to blow his trumpet. So we have in verse 5 and 6, this is God's response to the fall and to sin. And then in verse 7, what's the mystery of God proclaimed to his prophets? It's the promise of the restoration of the kingdom. So that's what's going on in verse 7, is just saying, here's the oath that I'm making. Here's the response I have, and the oath that I'm making is that I'm going to continue this promise of the restoration of the kingdom, which is what all the Israelites were wanting all along. They want that. They want them to be the people that God had created them to be in the first place. Okay. And of course, he just announced that to his servants and the prophets, because that's who God speaks through, is the prophets and the servants. All right. So let's read 8 through, let's just finish up 10 there. 8 through, 11? Yeah, 8 through 11. Whoever wants to read. Okay.
Then the voice that I had heard from heaven spoke to me again, saying, Go, take the scroll that is open in the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land. So when I went to the angel and told him to give me the little scroll, and he said to me, Take it and eat. It will be bitter to your stomach, but sweet as honey in your mouth. So I took the little scroll from the hand of the angel and ate it. It was sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. Then they said to me, You must prophesy again about many peoples and nations and languages and kings.
Okay. So the first thing that I noticed whenever I was reading this is that the scroll is open. Remember, we had all these 7 scrolls before this, and they were all sealed up. Mm-hmm. This one, the scroll is open, so that means that whatever was written on this scroll has been known. Everyone knows what it says now. It's not been sealed up. And then it says, Go and take the open scroll from the hand of the angel who's standing on the sea and the land, who is God and Jesus combined. So I went up to the angel. Give me the little scroll, I said. Take it, they said to me, and eat it. And, of course, it's going to be bitter. So here's this open scroll already, and he's told to eat it. And I thought about grabbing some of our honey, and all of us just taste some honey. Just as an excuse to eat some honey in this one. But anyway, so what's going on with this little scroll, and why is it sweet in the mouth and yet bitter to the stomach? And this open scroll, something has already been disclosed or given or shared. And what my professor is saying, you need to leave the civilian here. I'm being better about seeing when y'all pop up and joining you to the thing here, so I'm glad you're here. All right, so what I see John talking about here, and by the way, Seville and anybody else that might be listening to us, we're on chapter 10, verse 10 is what we're talking about. So we have that open scroll. Something's already been disclosed. So he actually says that it is the old covenant. The old covenant that God made with the Israelites is what this is. It's almost like, here is one of the ideas of the Old Testament covenant is to be able to deal with sin. And the way you dealt with sin is with sacrifices, burnt offerings, and that's how you dealt with missing the mark. But basically, the Old Testament covenant was God's first fix, for sin. But it didn't ever have added to it. It had a promise of salvation. It had a promise of these good things, but it just wasn't being fulfilled yet. But it just never was fulfilled. So he's saying that what's going on there is that scroll has already been disclosed, so it's that Old Testament covenant. It has the promise of salvation, which is a sweetness, but it just never really covered all of the sin issues, and that's the bitterness in his stomach. So that's what he's saying. And then, of course, in verse 11, you must prophesy again, he said to me, about many people, nations, languages, and kingdoms. And it's basically, that's the same thing as saying tribes, tongues, and nations. It's basically just saying you need to prophesy this to all the people who are not Christians and not Jewish people. This is what needs to go on. So he's basically saying, I'm not throwing away the Old Covenant. You still need to read the Old Testament. You need to have that in your life, but you need to realize that you will never be able to understand the New Testament without having the Old Testament being able to figure things out. So it's cool. I mean, it's a really, Jesus did not say I came to abolish the law, but to complete it. Anyway, and to be able to give a little bit more enfleshment, literally. Anyway, it was a bad joke. All right, so we're going to read chapter 11 here. We'll read 1 through, we'll read 1. Let's read 1 through 6. Whoever would like to read that. Revelation 11, 1 through 6.
Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, come and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample over the holy city for 42 months. And I will grant my 2 witnesses authority to prophesy for 1,260 days, wearing sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone wants to harm them, fire pours from their mouth and consumes their foes. Anyone who wants to harm them must be killed in this manner. They have authority to shut the sky so that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying, and they have authority over the waters to turn them into blood, and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they desire.
Okay. Wow. Thank you. So I don't know if anyone's ever seen the Left Behind movies or not, but boy, they had a field day with this one in the Left Behind movies. Let me tell you, they loved having those 2 prophets and fire out of their mouths and all kinds of stuff. It was, oh my goodness. Anyway, all right. So the first thing that we have to understand is that he's giving a measuring rod to measure the temple, and understand that the temple. The way that the temple was you had the temple, you had the main altar that was in front of the temple, and that was kind of like the temple space, but then you had all the space on the outside of the temple, and that space on the outside of the temple, well, that would be where the Gentiles are. That's the outer courts. They're allowed to be part of that, but you were not allowed to be a part of the temple part unless you were Jewish. And then, of course, you had to be a priest to be able to go into another part, and then you had to be the high priest to go into the holiest of holies. In that area. So that's all he's kind of saying is, again, we're still dealing with the temple here. We're dealing with God's people there and then God's non-people outside of there. And then we come to verse 2, and of course we have some fun numbers we get to play with here. So they're going to trample the holy city for 42 months. So if we say that there are 30 days in a month, then that would equal the 1,260 days. And that is, all those numbers are basically saying 3.5 years. Now, they had a 30-day month, and then every 35 years they would add a week, is what the Jewish people would do. So that's how you can always have the 30 days there for their mindset and for their ways of thinking. That way, the reason they did that is because he would keep all the festivals in the same day of the week. Is the reason they did this. They want to make sure that they knew when the festivals were coming, they knew what day of the week it was going to happen on, and that's the reason they did 30 days for every month, and then every 35 years they'd add a week there. So, well, that would, it's kind of like those leap year babies.
Yeah.
It's like a leap 35 year for a week if you're born in that week for that 35 year. Anyway, all right. So, but 3.5 years is an important image to the Israelites. Because when Elijah confronted the priest of Baal, who was brought about through Jezebel in the Old Testament, it was a very tense time of tribulation for God's people under Jezebel during that time period. And so Elijah, the prophet, prayed, and guess what? It didn't rain for 3.5 years. So this is kind of pointing out the fact that God is still at work, even though it might seem like this tribulation stuff's going around all around you. This is nothing new, number one. And this is the thoughts you should be thinking about, is this 3.5 years is trying to be able to say, it's okay. Like, God is still in control, because Baal was the god of thunder and rain. If Baal is the god of thunder and rain, and they're all praying for Baal to make it rain, and then here comes Elijah the prophet, and he's the one who tells their God, don't rain. Somebody's got some power a little bit better than Baal. And there was always a joke in my seminary class, because one of my professors' names was Bill Arnold, and he's from the South, and his wife, he married. His wife is from the South, and I think it was like her aunt or grandmother or something.
Baal.
Always called him Baal. Baal! And he said, man, it took a while, because he's an Old Testament scholar. This is what he deals with, is Baal the god. It's pretty funny. So every time I'd see him, I'd say, hi, Baal. I always thought it was funny to give him a hard time about that. All right, so now we have 2 olive trees, and we have 2 lampstands. This is actually imagery from Zechariah. Most of this imagery is from Zechariah, because Zechariah is 99% about the restoration of the kingdom. We have 2 lampstands in Zechariah. The first lampstand was Joshua, which was the high priest in that story. And the second lampstand in Zechariah was Zerubbabel, who was the king. And guess what Jesus is called? He is the priest and the king, right? He's the high priest and king. Now, the 2 olive trees, we have 2 olive trees that are probably pretty special in the Old Testament, the Israelites' mindset. Elijah, who is the one who closes up the sky, and then Moses, who changed water to blood in all the plagues. And Elijah represents the prophets, and Moses represents the law. So the olive trees are representing the law and the prophets. The entire Old Testament covenant is what's being represented here. And the Old Testament covenant, which is going back to chapter 10, verse 8 in Revelation here, and seeing the small open covenant, the scroll, as the old covenant. So what we just read is talking about the old covenant again. So this is just more imagery of the same stuff. And now we need to read 7 through... Let's read 7 through... sorry, I'm looking. Let's read 7 through 9. We'll just go through 7 to 10. Why not? So, yeah, read 7 through 10, please. Whoever wants to read.
When
I
they
can do
have
that.
finished their testimony, the beast that comes up from the bottomless pit will make war upon them and can conquer them and kill them, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city that is prophetically called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. For 3.5 days, members of the peoples and tribes and languages of nations will gaze at their dead bodies and refuse to let them be placed in a tomb. and the inhabitants of the earth will gloat over them and celebrate and exchange presents, because these two prophets had been a torment to the inhabitants of the earth.
Okay, all right. So we've got, just some really easy reading here. I need to see if Jan, hi. I want to say hi to you and say I love you, and same thing for you, Seville. And I know that Marlis is here, but we just can't see her here. Jen, are you with us though? You are here though.
I'm with you.
Okay, good. I always like to say, and I know I'm sure Seville is, but he's probably eating a sandwich. He's got himself muted and blinded, so he's probably drinking and burping on accident. Giving him a hard time when he's not here, right? Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure that I'm acknowledging y'all too. Y'all are special too, and y'all are, even though you can't be here. All right. So we have verse 8. Their bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which is spiritually called Sodom and Egypt, which their Lord was crucified. Now, it's interesting that there is plural, and in mine it says bodies, but it's supposed to be their corpse, and the corpse is singular in the Greek. Now, I don't know about your translations, but I think probably most translations are still saying a plural bodies or a plural corpses. But in the Greek, it's actually their body or their corpse. And it's pretty clear there that that's where their Lord was crucified. And of course, we know that is definitely Jesus' language, being crucified there. So what John is seeing here is the consummation of the Old Testament in the cross and the resurrection of Jesus. Because God's ultimate response to the Old Testament, to the Old Covenant, is Jesus, is the cross. That's God's ultimate response to that stuff. And that's what we're seeing here. We're actually seeing Christ on the cross through all of the stuff we were talking about. Christ is he is the law and the prophets. He is the high priest and the king. All of this stuff of the Old Testament is being summed up in this imagery of Jesus. And this is God's ultimate response. All right, verse 9. Again, it's a singular corpse, and that singular corpse is the Old Covenant. Now, who's rejoicing here? It's those of every tribe, tongue, and nation, right? It's the people that are not Christians that are celebrating this fact. And now we have 3.5 days instead of 3.5 years. It's hard to squeeze 3 days into the death and resurrection of Jesus. We've already seen that 3.5 years is when Israel was living in tribulation at the hands of the fallen world. And this could be and probably is a corollary between that time and then the ministry and the time of Jesus. But they don't really know exactly what's going on there as far as all the, there's, just like I said, of everything else, there are so many different translations and so many different interpretations of all this stuff. I mean, you can get the sky's the limit, whatever you want to. But of all the research that my professor was doing, he really does think there is something going on there between the Old Testament and the Old Covenant and Jesus, with the 3.5 years and the 3.5 days. But nothing's been really well so fleshed out that he would take it hook, line, and sinker. All right, then verse 10, they were really partying here. They were celebrating them. They were making merry. They're giving presents to one another. I mean, this sounds like Christmas time, They're celebrating like nobody's business. The presence of the people of God are a disturbance to the fallen Babylon world. And when that presence is gone, they're glad. They don't have to worry about, the stuff that's going on there. All right, so and that's really what's going on there. They're just celebrating. They're thrilled about it. All right, so let's read 11 through. We'll read 11 through 14. And I knew someone online was going to read earlier. Who was that was talking? Was that you, Dorothy?
Yeah, it was.
You want to read it for us?
Sure. But after 3.5 days, the Spirit of life from God entered them, and they stood upright on their feet. This struck terror into the hearts of those who were watching them, And they heard a tremendous voice speaking to these two from heaven, saying, "Come up here." And they went up to heaven in a cloud in full view of their enemies. And at that moment there was a great earthquake, and a tenth part of the city fell in ruins, and 7,000 people were known to have been killed in the earthquake. The rest were terrified and acknowledged the glory of the God of heaven. Am I supposed to read 14 also?
Yeah, go ahead and read 14. That's fine.
Okay. The second disaster is now past, and I see the third disaster following hard upon the heels of the second.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Tell me when to stop.
No, you're good. You're good. That's good.
Good.
Yep, perfect. That's great. So, all right. So now going back to verse 11, now we have these two prophets that represent Jesus that were dead. And guess what? Now they have life in them. They stood up on their feet. They've now been resurrected. And then what happens after that? They went up into heaven, right? So, I mean, this is Jesus. This is obviously a Jesus thing. He was resurrected, and then he didn't die again. He actually ascended into heaven, just like these individuals or this body, these individuals with a singular body. So what's going on here is the law and the prophets and the person of Jesus were dead, they were resurrected, and now they're ascended all with Jesus. And that's really what's going on there in verse 11 and 12. In verse 13, and at that hour/moment, well, what moment? Well, the moment of death, resurrection, and ascension. Yes, all of them. It's not just like an hour where they all happen. It's just that moment, understanding. And when that moment happened, an earthquake and a tenth of the city fell. In the Greek, it says the names of 7,000 men were killed. And which is interesting that it doesn't ever say that. I don't know of a single translation I know of that says that. But it just, and of course we know that name equals your nature. And so 7,000 men were killed. And that's super important. I think it's super, super important because in 13, at that moment, there was a huge earthquake. 10th of the city fell. 7,000 of the people were killed by the earthquake. But again, it was saying the names, the nature of the 7,000. All right, so 1/10 of the city fell. 1/10 in Jewish imagery. What's a tenth? What do you think of when I say a tenth? A tithe.
Oh,
That's your tithe. You're supposed to at least give 10% of what you make to God, right? That's 1/10. So that's a tithe understanding. But what does the tithe represent? The number 10 equals a completeness or a wholeness. So the whole reason you're giving your tithe is to represent in your own heart and your own life that you're telling God, honestly, all of this is yours. That's the reason they chose a tenth, because 10 has that understanding of a completeness or a wholeness. And so I'm just going to give you a symbolic 10% because what I'm really doing is saying everything I am, everything I have is yours. So when you say a tenth in Jewish imagery, that's the tithe, and the tithe represents the whole lot. So the 10% we give to God is just showing the other 90% is God's, and that we're good stewards of God's money for God's purposes in our life and those around us. With that understanding, it's not just a tenth of the city that's fallen. It's the whole city that's fallen. It's the entire city that's fallen. And what city is this? Well, it's the city of Babylon. It's the Sodom and Egypt that we saw back in verse 8. Both of those cultures were totally against God, and they have now been completely destroyed. That's pretty crazy to think about. Now, the names of 7 humans died. The number 7, that should also have the number of wholeness and completeness, because that's how long it took God to do the creation. So we have creation in 7 days. And of course, I've said in the past, how do we emphasize a number? We throw some zeros in the end of it, right? We multiply it either by itself or by 10 or 100 or 1,000 or a million or whatever else. So it's just talking about when it says 7,000 died, guess what? It's saying everybody died. So this is super important. And again, names were important. It doesn't ever, it just says that 7,000 people were killed. Does it say names in yours?
No.
Yeah, see, I don't think it says names in anybody. It's crazy important. It's in the Greek. I don't know why we put it in there. But, of course, now we know that name equals the very character of who you are. Your destiny, almost, is summed up in your name. So here we are seeing the totality of the fallen human nature dying, and the rest becoming fearers of God, or those that are respecting and honoring God. And those who are not a part of New Jerusalem citizens are in the fallen Babylon world. And so they're basically, it's the totality of all of the broken humanity that we're seeing die here. I've given you a lot just now. I don't know if we want to have some conversation and a little bit of discussion around this, or if y'all want to go ahead and let me finish through 14, and then we can kind of breathe a little bit. Now, Paul says the same thing that's going on here in Revelation in 1 Corinthians 5, 14, and 15, where it says, all have died in the death of Jesus. Kind of saying the same thing, it's put a lot more bluntly and way more boring than Revelation, but it's saying the same thing. So here, now we have in verse 14 the second, and you said it was, what did you say it was? It was the second. I have woe.
So does mine.
Yeah?
I have woe.
Dorothy, was it you that was reading it? I think you said something else. What's that?
Disaster.
Disaster. Yeah, you had disaster, which is interesting. So anyway, terror. That's right. Yeah, you always say terror instead of woe. But anyway, so the second woe is past. The third woe is coming very soon here. Remember the eagle in chapter 8, verse 13. That was the second woe. So now we've finally seen the end of the second woe, and here comes the third. Whoa! I couldn't resist it. The third woe is coming quickly. Once again, we have a different understanding from those of John's readers. Obviously, this has nothing to do with temporal quickness, unless you redefine quick as 2,000 years. It never comes even after the seventh seal. It will happen when the consummation of the cross occurs. So the illustration here is that God created us, or his illustration, he's saying, God created us to find our own wholeness in relationship with God, a God-centered life. The fall gave us the ability to be self-referenced in non-relationship. And the horrible consequence of our sin is that we cannot come into relationship with God, but it is God that makes it possible through the cross. That's what happened on the cross. Jesus enters into our brokenness, into our sin, so that the healing and that restoration of that promise of the Old Testament, the sweetness piece, can actually be lived out. And that's exactly what's going on here. So, we started with a God-centered life in creation. The fall, whatever you want to, if it was a literal fall or just whatever it was, human nature, whatever you want to think it is, that's what broke us from that God-centered relationship to have the ability to be self-referenced. One of the reasons when the snake is tempting them, saying, oh, you're going to be like God. Instead of being God-referenced, it's all about me now. And having a non-relationship reference, self-referenced understanding. And I've said this before. All of the greatest, when people really start messing up in their lives, and you see the divorces, and you see the alcoholism or whatever else get taken away, most of that happens when people start to seclude themselves away from community. When they start to become so self-referenced that nothing else, you don't think that you're affecting anyone else, but it's actually affecting everyone around you. We talked about that 2 weeks ago, 1 or 2 weeks ago. But anyway, but that's what's going on the cross. That's what's going on here. It's that the names of the people, the very nature of that self-referenced ability to be self-referenced, has now been bridged, has now been cared for and now taken care of with the cross of Christ. because Christ in Jesus enters into our brokenness to be able to help us re-find a God-centered life in the midst of that. All right. Any conversation on what we talked about? Because we went through a lot of imagery that does not look or sound at all what you've probably ever been taught or told or even read yourself. So I don't know if anybody wants to have any conversation around it or anything else like that before we move on. Any questions? Anything else? I don't know what this is. Anyway. Okay, all right.
Explained it really well.
Okay, all right, well, that's good. That's good.
I see more clothes than people on your screen.
The clothes are an ad. I'm on the internet right now reading the Bible. But you can see people on the screen. If you want to see some people, there you go. There's Dorothy and there's Janet. And of course, Seville's eating a sandwich.
So you're not shopping while you're doing this?
Yeah.
Of course he is.
Yeah. Maybe I am shopping. Maybe I should be shopping. It's all self-referenced life anyway. I don't care about y'all people. Be out here and working. Okay, all right. So, well, let's go ahead, or we'll get into here. We'll get into verse 15. Let's actually do 15. Well, let's just finish out. We just want to make sure. Yeah, we'll finish out chapter 11. So let's read 15 through 19. Whoever would like to read it.
I can.
You want?
Then the seventh angel blew his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever." Then the 24 elders who sit on their thrones before God fell on their faces and worshipped God, singing, "We give you thanks, Lord, God Almighty, who are and who were. For you have taken your great power and begun to reign. The nations raged, but your wrath has come, and the time for judging the dead, for rewarding your servants, the prophets and saints, and all who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying those who destroy the earth." Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant was seen within his temple, and there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and heavy hail.
Okay, awesome. All right, so we still have the seventh angel blowing the trumpet here. Loud voices were heard from heaven. "Now the kingdom of the world has passed to our Lord and his Messiah," said the voices, "and he will reign forever and ever." Now, does not say the kingdoms of this world there. It says now the kingdom of the world. It's a single kingdom of the world. So we're not talking about all the kingdoms of the world. We're actually talking about the fallen Babylon world, the entire fallen Babylon world there. That kingdom is what we're actually talking about here. Had passed. And now it's been, given over to the Lord and Messiah. And of course, reign forever and ever. 24 elders, what are they doing? Just sitting on their thrones around God's presence, fell on their faces and worship God. That's what they were already doing. I don't know if you all remember when we talked about the most beautiful image of worship and discipleship, but they're always laying their crowns, and they're always bowing. They're always worshiping God at all times. And that's just a beautiful example of being a disciple of God. And then the one who was, or the one who is, who was, and notice there is no more and is to come. Do you notice there is no is to come there?
Right.
Why? Because Jesus has already come on the cross. He's brought the kingdom into being. There is no is to come there. All right. Verse 18, destroying the earth, or destroy the ones destroying the earth, right? Is that? I want to make sure. The nations are raging, your anger came down for judging the dead and to give the reward to your servants, the prophets, the holy ones, the small and great, who fear your name. It's time to destroy the destroyers of the earth. Yeah, it's time to destroy the destroyers of the earth. And that's what the prophets were waiting for. That's what everybody was waiting for. That's what the people underneath the altar earlier in Revelation were saying, how long, Lord? How much longer do we have to wait before your judgment is actually made and occurs? And that ended the trumpets. So all the trumpets have now finished. That was the seventh angel blowing his trumpet there. And then in verse 19, we get a heavenly vision here. So it's almost like there's like he took a breath there and then kept on writing, okay? So here we have the heavenly vision. The temple is open in verse 19 there. And there's going to be a great chasm. And we're going to read that in 12:1. There's going to be a great sign. We're going to read in 15:1. And then the temple's going to open up in 15:5. But I just want to make sure you all know that we are now officially in heaven. It's a heavenly vision understanding here. Yeah. All right. The temple is open, and they can see the ark. That's crazy. They actually have access to the presence of God. The ark was only in the holiest of holies. The only individual that could be able to go into the holiest of holies one time a year was the high priest. And that was the only time that anyone was ever allowed in the holiest of holies. And now everyone has access to that. Now everyone is in the presence of God. No longer is a priest needed to be there. So we now have unhindered access to God because of what Christ has done on the cross. And then he said a lot of the texts from the original texts have added heavy hail on the end of it. He said, I don't know why a lot of them added heavy hail or some kind of hail in the end. Yeah, as if thunderclaps, rumblings, earthquake, and lightning weren't enough. We're going to add some hail in there too, because that's got to be important. It's got to throw hail in there. I know can you only imagine all the car lot owners every time it hails? It was probably a car dealership that added the heavy hail. Heavy hail's in there too. All right. Well, I've got 12 o'clock. I don't know if we want to end here and just let everybody have a little bit more time, or if we want to keep on going. Chapter 12, it's thick just like the rest of it, but it's probably a little bit thicker than some of the ones that we've done in the past. So we probably could use that time to just start fresh next week, if that's okay with everybody.
Aye.
Aye? Oh, you're agreeing, you're voting on yes on that?
Well, and next week,
C.
are we?
Oh, yeah. So next week we will not be meeting next week because we have the leadership team meeting, the meeting that we have. So no, not meeting next week. Yes, meeting the week after that. And I love y'all. Y'all have a wonderful day. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Peace, everyone. Love you. Happy birthday, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Love you, Dorothy. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
Bye.